The text message glowed on the screen like a confession. Elena read the words once, twice, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. The message was from David, her husband, sent at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday while she sat in their home office reviewing notes for the foundation gala. Can't stop thinking about last night. You feel like everything she never was. Meet me at the usual place Thursday. I'll make an excuse. She stared at the words until they stopped looking like language and became shapes, abstract and meaningless. Then her phone buzzed again in her hand. Shit, wrong person. Delete that, please. The world didn't shatter loudly. There was no dramatic crack, no thunder, no cinematic score swelling in the background. Instead, everything simply stopped making sense, like an equation that had always balanced suddenly refusing to add up. Elena sat completely still in her chair, phone resting in her palm, while her nervous system tried to catch up to the information her mind was rejecting. She had been married to David Harrison for 6 years, together for 8. She knew the weight of his hand on her shoulder, the particular way he cleared his throat before important phone calls, the exact shade of coffee he preferred in the morning. She knew him, or she thought she did. But the man who wrote those words was a stranger. Everything she never was. The phrase lodged itself in her chest like a splinter, small but impossible to ignore. Not just the confirmation of infidelity, but the comparative diminishment. She had been measured against someone else and found lacking, weighed on a scale she didn't know existed, and discovered she came up short. Elena's hands were steady. That surprised her. She expected trembling, some physical manifestation of the earthquake happening inside her body, but her fingers remained calm as she read the messages a third time. The clinical part of her brain, the part trained in research and analysis, began cataloging details. The usual place. Not a first meeting then. Not a mistake or moment of weakness. This had infrastructure, routine, history. Her phone lit up with an incoming call. David's name and photo filled the screen. The picture was from their honeymoon, his face sunlit and happy, arms around her on a beach she could still smell if she closed her eyes. She watched it ring. 4 buzzes. 5. Then silence. Immediately, a text. Elena, please pick up. Another, I can explain. Another, it's not what you think. She set the phone face down on her desk and stared at the wall. A framed photograph hung there, one she had chosen and arranged years ago. The two of them at a charity gala, her in midnight blue silk, him in black tie, his hand on the small of her back. They looked perfect, happy, like people who told each other everything. The lies we live inside without knowing, Elena thought. The stories we tell ourselves because the truth is too expensive to afford. She didn't cry. The tears felt trapped somewhere behind her sternum, locked in a place she couldn't access yet. Instead, she felt a strange numbness spreading through her limbs, a protective dissociation that felt like watching herself from across the room. This is happening to you, her mind whispered. This is real. The phone buzzed again and again. Calls, texts, a mounting desperation she could feel through the device. But Elena didn't move. She sat in her chair as the autumn night deepened outside her window, as the house settled into its familiar evening sounds, as her entire marriage revealed itself to be something other than what she believed. She thought about Margot. She didn't want to, but the thought arrived anyway, uninvited and inevitable. Her stepsister, the woman who had been in her life since childhood, who had always taken up more space, commanded more attention, required more energy. The woman Elena had helped when she moved back to the city 6 months ago, introducing her to contacts, inviting her to events, welcoming her into the careful life Elena had built. Elena had no proof it was Margot. The text didn't name her. But some part of Elena knew anyway, the way you know things in your body before your mind admits them. The timeline assembled itself against her will. David's increased texting, the late meetings, the foundation events where Margot started appearing as a consultant, her role vague but her presence constant. The way David quoted her now, mentioned her casually, laughed at references Elena wasn't part of. The usual place. Everything she never was. Elena stood slowly, her legs uncertain beneath her. She walked through the house she had decorated, past furniture she had chosen, through rooms she had filled with careful beauty. Every detail here bore her fingerprints, her aesthetic, her quiet labor. She had made this house. A home. She had made this life run smoothly. She had made herself so easy, so undemanding, so perpetually accommodating that apparently she had become invisible. She climbed the stairs to their bedroom and turned off the lights. When David came home, whenever that would be, he would find her here in the dark, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. But she wouldn't confront him tonight. She wouldn't give him the explosion he was clearly panicking about, the scene he was preparing his explanations for. Elena had spent her entire life being quiet. She had made an art of silence, a practice of swallowing her louder feelings and offering only the soft ones. She had believed this was strength, maturity, love. Now she understood it had been something else entirely. It had been permission. An invitation to take her for granted, to assume her constancy, to believe she would absorb anything without breaking. But she had broken. The fracture was total and irreversible, even if no one else could see it yet. So she would stay quiet a little longer, not because she was afraid or uncertain, but because she needed time to understand what she was feeling, what she wanted, what came next. She would absorb this information the way she had absorbed everything else in her life, silently, carefully, without burdening anyone else with the weight of it. And when she finally spoke, when she finally broke the silence that had defined her entire marriage, it would be on her terms, in her timing, with her words. Elena closed her eyes and waited for her husband to come home. The sound of the garage door woke her, though she hadn't realized she'd fallen asleep. Elena heard David's footsteps on the stairs, quick and anxious. The bedroom door opened slowly. Light from the hallway spilled across the floor. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, a silhouette backlit and uncertain. Then he moved into the room, his movements careful, like someone approaching an unexploded device. "Elena?" His voice was soft, testing. She didn't respond. She kept her breathing steady, eyes closed, pretending the sleep that had been real moments before. David sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. She felt his hand hover near her shoulder, not quite touching, then withdraw. He sat there in the dark for what felt like hours but was probably minutes. She could hear him breathing, could feel the anxiety radiating off him in waves. Finally he stood. She heard him undress quietly, brush his teeth in the ensuite, return to bed. He lay on his side of the mattress, careful not to touch her, the space between them vast and charged. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the darkness. "God, Elena, I'm so sorry." She didn't move, didn't acknowledge. Let him believe she was sleeping, unreachable, innocent of whatever he thought she knew. He turned over, restless. She could tell from his breathing he wouldn't sleep. Good, she thought, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a vast echoing emptiness where her feelings used to be. When morning came, Elena rose at her usual time and went through her usual routine. Shower, skincare, outfit selected with the same care she always employed. She moved through these rituals like an actor preparing for a role, conscious of every gesture in a way she had never been before. David was already awake when she came downstairs. He stood in the kitchen with coffee brewing, still in his pajamas, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes found hers immediately, searching her face for some indication of her emotional state. "Good morning," Elena said. Her voice sounded normal, pleasant even. She walked to the coffee maker and poured herself a cup. "Elena." David's voice was strained. "We need to talk about last night." She added cream to her coffee, the exact amount she always used, and stirred slowly. "What about last night?" "The text I sent you. I need to explain." Elena took a sip of coffee and looked at him over the rim of her cup. His face was pale, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed. He looked awful. She felt detached from this observation, like a scientist noting data. "It was a mistake," David continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "A completely stupid joke that I sent to the wrong person. A colleague and I were texting about a surprise we're planning for you, for the gala, and I was being sarcastic about how you'd react, and it came out all wrong, and I realized immediately how it looked." "David." Elena set down her coffee cup. "I'm tired. I didn't sleep well. Can we talk about this later?" He stared at her, clearly thrown by her lack of reaction. "You're not upset?" "I'm exhausted," she said simply. "I have a meeting this morning. We can discuss whatever you need to discuss tonight." It wasn't a lie. She was tired, bone deep and profoundly, and she genuinely could not access the energy required to have this conversation right now, to wade through his explanations and deflections, to participate in whatever performance of marital conflict resolution he had prepared. David looked simultaneously relieved and confused. "Okay, yes, tonight. We'll talk tonight." He moved toward her as if to embrace her, then stopped, uncertain. "Elena, I love you." You know that, right? She picked up her coffee and her bag. I need to go. I'll see you this evening. She left him standing in the kitchen, and she felt his eyes on her back as she walked to her car. When she closed the garage door behind her, she finally allowed herself to exhale. The next few days passed in a blur of surreal normalcy. Elena went to meetings. She coordinated vendor contracts for the upcoming gala. She returned emails and phone calls with her characteristic efficiency. She smiled at appropriate moments and spoke when spoken to and moved through the world as if nothing fundamental had shifted. But everything had changed. She felt it in her body, this new awareness that she was performing rather than living. Every interaction with David became conscious theater. When he asked about her day, she gave pleasant, generic responses. When he tried to initiate deeper conversations about their relationship, about the text message he still insisted was a misunderstanding, she redirected or postponed. I'm not angry, she told him one evening when he pushed. I'm just tired. Can we please not do this right now? And he would back off, relieved by her apparent acceptance, not realizing that her quietness was something new entirely. Not accommodation, but withdrawal. Not peace, but absence. David became attentive in a way that felt like panic management. He brought her coffee in the morning without being asked. He suggested date nights and weekend getaways. He asked about her work with exaggerated interest, as if suddenly remembering she had an interior life that existed independent of their domestic logistics. Elena accepted these gestures with polite gratitude and felt nothing. The numbness that had descended the night of the text message had calcified into something harder, a protective shell that kept the world at arm's length. She knew she was in shock, that this dissociation was her psyche's way of managing something too devastating to process all at once. But she also knew that underneath the numbness, something else was growing, something that would eventually demand acknowledgement. For now, though, she focused on the immediate task of getting through each day. She woke up. She went through her routines. She managed the household and her professional obligations. She spoke when necessary and stayed quiet when possible. She watched her husband with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. And she waited. For what? She wasn't entirely sure. For the numbness to lift. For clarity to emerge. For the moment when she would finally know what she wanted to do with the information burning a hole in her chest. The lunch with Margot happened on a Thursday. Her stepsister had texted 3 times suggesting they get together, and Elena finally agreed, mostly because refusing would require explanation and she had no energy for managing anyone else's feelings. They met at an upscale bistro downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick and seasonal menus and waitstaff who described each dish like a poem. Margot was already seated when Elena arrived, looking effortlessly beautiful in the way that seemed woven into her DNA. Her hair caught the light. Her skin glowed. She wore a silk blouse in a shade of emerald that probably cost more than Elena's entire outfit. Elena. Margot stood to embrace her, and Elena allowed it, feeling her stepsister's perfume wrap around her like smoke. It was a scent she didn't recognize, something expensive and deliberate. You look tired. Are you feeling okay? Just busy with gala prep, Elena said, settling into her chair. You know how it is. I really don't, Margot laughed. I don't know how you manage everything you do. The foundation work, the social calendar, taking care of David. You're superhuman. The casual mention of David's name landed like a stone in still water. Elena picked up her menu and studied it carefully. We all have our roles. Margot ordered a salad and white wine. Elena ordered the same, though she had no appetite for either. The small talk that followed felt like walking through fog. Margot talked about a photography project she was working on, a potential collaboration with a gallery, some drama with a client. She checked her phone periodically, smiling at something on the screen in a way that made Elena's stomach turn. David's been so helpful with my foundation consulting work, Margot said at one point, spearing a piece of lettuce with more enthusiasm than the action warranted. He really has an incredible mind for strategy, and he's so generous with his time. Elena took a sip of wine. That's kind of him. He mentioned you two might be going away for a weekend soon. Anniversary trip or something? Did he? Elena kept her voice neutral. David hadn't mentioned any trip to her. We haven't finalized anything. Oh, maybe I misunderstood. Margot waved her hand dismissively. You know how he is, always planning surprises. Elena looked at her stepsister across the table, really looked at her. Margot met her gaze with bright, guileless eyes, but something moved beneath the surface, something that knew more than it was saying. Elena recognized the particular quality of Margot's attention, the way she was watching for Elena's reaction while pretending casual disinterest. "He does love his surprises," Elena said quietly. The conversation continued, but Elena stopped tracking it closely. She was observing instead, cataloging. The expensive bracelet on Margot's wrist that she didn't remember seeing before. The way Margot mentioned David's name frequently, casually, testing how it sounded in the space between them. The proprietary knowledge of his schedule, his preferences, his thoughts. This woman who had always taken from Elena without asking was taking again, and she was doing it with a smile, with sisterly affection, with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for her acquisitions. Elena excused herself to the restroom at one point, not because she needed to, but because she needed distance from Margot's performance. She stood in the elegant bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face appeared calm, composed, perfectly put together. No one looking at her would know she was fracturing from the inside out. When she returned to the table, Margot was on her phone, typing rapidly with a small smile. She looked up when Elena approached and quickly locked the screen. "Sorry, work thing," Margot said. "Where were we?" They finished lunch with more empty conversation. Margot insisted on splitting the check even though Elena knew she would expense it somehow. They hugged goodbye on the sidewalk, and Margot told her they should do this more often, that she missed her, that family was so important. Elena drove home in silence, hands steady on the wheel, mind racing. When she pulled into the garage, she sat in her car for a long moment before going inside. The house was empty. David was at his office downtown. She had hours before he would return. She went upstairs to their bedroom and stood in the closet they shared. David's suits hung in neat rows, organized by color and season. She had arranged them this way because organization was one of the many invisible labors she performed that kept their life running smoothly. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Evidence, maybe. Confirmation, something concrete to validate the suspicion that had taken root in her chest and was growing like poison ivy. She checked his jacket pockets methodically, feeling slightly ridiculous, but unable to stop. Receipts, dry cleaning tickets, a business card from someone in commercial real estate. Nothing incriminating. Then, in the pocket of a navy blazer he had worn last week, she found it. A receipt from a restaurant she recognized. One of the most expensive in the city. The kind of place you took someone you wanted to impress. The date on the receipt was from 2 weeks ago, a Tuesday night. David had told her he was working late that evening, that he had back-to-back meetings and wouldn't be home until after 10. The receipt showed a charge for $247. Dinner for 2. Wine. Dessert. Elena stood holding the small slip of paper, and something inside her went very still and very cold. This was real. Tangible. Not paranoia or insecurity or her imagination running wild. This was evidence of deception, printed in black and white. She took a photo of the receipt with her phone, then carefully returned it to the pocket where she found it. She walked downstairs and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands were shaking now, finally, the tremor she had been waiting for since the night of the text message. The disorientation she had been swimming through crystallized into something sharper. This was happening. David was lying to her. The affair, or whatever it was, had infrastructure and history. And based on every signal her instincts were screaming, the other woman was Margot, her stepsister, the woman who had shared her childhood, who knew her vulnerabilities and insecurities, who had always existed in Elena's life as a kind of beautiful, careless force of nature. The woman Elena had helped, supported, welcomed into her carefully constructed world. The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was familial, historical, a repetition of every dynamic from their childhood. When Margot took up space and Elena made herself smaller, when Margot demanded attention and Elena learned to be invisible. Elena sat at the kitchen island and stared at nothing. The late afternoon light slanted through the windows, turning everything golden and gentle. The house was quiet except for the hum of appliances, the tick of the clock in the hallway. Everything looked exactly as it always had, but nothing would ever be the same. She didn't know yet what she was going to do. She only knew she couldn't keep pretending. The performance of normalcy was becoming unsustainable. The numbness was starting to crack, and underneath it was something she didn't have a name for yet. Not quite anger, not quite grief, something harder and colder and more permanent. When David came home that evening, Elena was in her study working on her laptop. He knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Hey," he said, "want to order in for dinner?" She looked up at him. This man she had loved, married, built a life with. This stranger who lied to her face. "Sure," she said. "Whatever you want." He smiled, relieved by her easiness. "Thai, okay. Perfect." He left to place the order, and Elena returned her attention to her screen. But she wasn't reading anymore. She was thinking, calculating, beginning to understand that if she was going to survive this, she needed to stop absorbing and start acting. But carefully, strategically, on her own terms. The silence that had always been her default was becoming something else, not weakness or accommodation, but camouflage. A tactical pause before the counteroffensive she was only beginning to plan. The withdrawal started small, so subtle David didn't notice at first. Elena stopped doing the things she had always done without being asked. She stopped checking his calendar and reminding him of commitments. She stopped picking up his dry cleaning. She stopped initiating conversations about his day or asking how his meetings went. When the foundation's executive director emailed about an upcoming donor event, Elena responded professionally but didn't copy David or loop him in the way she usually would have. When his mother called to discuss Thanksgiving plans, Elena told her she would need to speak with David directly about his availability. These were small abdications, tiny refusals to perform the invisible labor that had kept their life running smoothly. And at first, David barely registered them. He was distracted, often on his phone, frequently working late or attending evening meetings that Elena no longer asked about. But gradually things started falling through the cracks. He missed a dentist appointment Elena would have normally reminded him about. He showed up to a business dinner underdressed because Elena hadn't mentioned the dress code. He double-booked himself for 2 events on the same evening because Elena wasn't managing his calendar anymore. "Did you know about the Morrison reception tonight?" he asked her one Thursday evening, frustrated and rushing. "I completely forgot." Elena looked up from her book. "I didn't know you'd RSVP'd. You usually track these things." "I have my own schedule to manage," she said mildly, and returned to her reading. David stared at her for a moment, confused by her tone, but he was too rushed to pursue it. He left in a hurry, and Elena sat in the quiet house feeling something close to satisfaction. Not because she enjoyed his inconvenience, but because she was discovering that her labor had value. Her attention had power, and when she withdrew it, people noticed. She stopped attending certain social events, citing headaches or fatigue. David went alone to gallery openings and charity dinners, and Elena heard through mutual friends that Margot had been his companion at several of these functions. People were starting to notice, starting to talk. Let them, Elena thought. Let them see what he chose over me. She began reclaiming parts of herself she had set aside during the marriage. She pulled out research from her graduate work, articles she'd been meaning to finish but never found time for because she was too busy managing David's life. She spent evenings in her study, door closed, working on a paper about Renaissance patronage networks that had been languishing in her drafts for 2 years. When David knocked and asked what she was working on, she gave vague answers and returned to her screen. He hovered in the doorway, clearly wanting more engagement, but she didn't offer it. "Are you okay?" he asked one night, concern creeping into his voice. "You seem distant." "I'm fine," Elena said. "Just focused on work. You're working a lot lately." "So are you." The observation landed between them, sharp and true. David had nothing to say to it. He retreated, and Elena continued typing. She started going to bed earlier, claiming exhaustion. She woke before David and went for morning walks, something she used to do years ago before her schedule became entirely oriented around his needs. The autumn air was crisp and clarifying. She walked through her neighborhood and felt her mind slowly emerging from the fog of shock. A former colleague reached out about a curatorial consulting opportunity at a prestigious museum. Elena had turned down similar offers before because the work required occasional travel, and David preferred her available. This time she said yes without consulting him. When she mentioned it casually over dinner, David looked surprised. "You took a consulting position?" "I did." "When did you interview?" "Last week." "You didn't mention it." Elena cut her food precisely. "I didn't realize I needed permission for my own career decisions." David set down his fork. "That's not what I meant. I just thought we discussed big decisions with each other, like you discussed your late-night work dinners with me." The words were out before she could stop them, sharper than she intended. David went still. "What's that supposed to mean?" Elena looked at him across the table. For a moment she considered saying everything. Confronting him about the text, the receipt, Margot, all of it. But she wasn't ready yet. She didn't have a plan, didn't know what she wanted, didn't trust herself to stay composed. Nothing, she said finally. I'm just saying we both have professional lives. I don't need to clear every decision with you. Of course not, David said, but his voice was uncertain. I'm just surprised. You've seemed different lately. Distant. I'm tired, David. That's all. But it wasn't all, and they both knew it. Something had shifted in the architecture of their marriage, some fundamental balance of power and attention. Elena was no longer available in the way she had always been. She was no longer accommodating, no longer flexible, no longer willing to bend herself into whatever shape the moment required. And David, accustomed to her constancy, didn't know what to do with this new version of his wife. Elena started having coffee with friends she had neglected during the years of making David's life her priority. Women who had their own careers, their own marriages, their own complicated relationships with ambition and partnership. She didn't tell them what was happening, but she asked questions. She listened to their stories about boundary setting and self-advocacy. She observed how they moved through the world with voices that didn't apologize for existing. One friend, a lawyer named Rachel, mentioned over coffee that she and her husband had almost divorced 3 years ago. What happened? Elena asked. He had an affair, emotional, not physical, but still. Rachel stirred her latte thoughtfully. What saved us wasn't forgiveness. It was me getting very clear about what I would and wouldn't tolerate. I stopped being the person who absorbed everything to keep the peace. I started being the person who named what was unacceptable and meant it. Did he change? Eventually. But first, he had to realize I was serious, that I had options, that I wasn't staying out of fear or dependence, but out of choice, and that if he wanted me to keep choosing him, he had to be worth choosing. Elena absorbed this. How did you get that clarity? Rachel smiled. I got really brutally honest with myself about what was actually happening versus what I was pretending was happening. I stopped gaslighting myself, and once I saw the truth clearly, I couldn't unsee it. That night, Elena sat in her study and made a list, not of David's transgressions or her grievances, but of facts, observable, documented realities. The text message, the dinner receipt, David's increased time with Margot, the late nights and vague explanations, the way Margot talked about David with proprietary familiarity, the inside jokes Elena wasn't part of, the expensive jewelry Margot was suddenly wearing, the way David quoted Margot now, referenced her opinions, sought her input on foundation matters. Elena looked at the list and felt something click into place. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't insecurity or jealousy or her being unreasonable. This was a pattern of deception and betrayal, documented and real. She thought about confronting David again, demanding the truth, forcing the conversation he kept avoiding. But she knew how it would go. He would minimize, deflect, accuse her of being suspicious or controlling. He would turn her legitimate concerns into character flaws she needed to work on. He would make her doubt her own perceptions until she backed down. She had seen this pattern before, in smaller conflicts over the years. Whenever she tried to name something that bothered her, David would sympathize briefly and then explain why she was misunderstanding or overreacting. He never invalidated her feelings outright. He was too sophisticated for that. Instead, he would gently, lovingly suggest that her perception was slightly off, that she was stressed or hormonal or tired, that the situation wasn't quite what she thought. And Elena, so practiced at doubting herself, so conditioned to believe that her needs were negotiable and her feelings were burdensome, would usually back down. She would accept his version of reality because it was easier than insisting on her own. But she was different now. The text message had shattered something fundamental, some core belief about her marriage and her husband. And in the absence of that belief, a clearer vision was emerging. She was seeing David not through the lens of love and hope, but through the lens of his actual behavior. And what she saw was a man who took her for granted, who dismissed her concerns, who had grown so confident in her silence that he had become careless in his betrayal. Elena sat with this knowledge and felt something hardening in her chest. Not quite anger yet. Something colder, more like resolve. She opened her laptop and searched for divorce attorneys in the city. She wasn't ready to file, wasn't even sure that's what she wanted. But she needed to understand her options, her rights, what a separation or divorce would actually look like practically and financially. She made notes, documented assets, pulled financial statements. She worked late into the night, building a foundation of information that would allow her to make decisions from a place of clarity rather than panic. When David came home after midnight, Clearly having been drinking, Elena was still in her study. He knocked lightly and poked his head in. "You're still up?" "Finishing some work," she said without looking at him. "Don't stay up too late." His words were slightly slurred. "Come to bed soon?" "I will." But she didn't. She stayed in her study until dawn, researching and planning and slowly, methodically building the infrastructure for a life that might not include him. The foundation gala was 3 weeks away. Elena had been planning it for months, coordinating every detail with the precision she brought to everything she did. It would be one of the largest fundraising events of the year, with major donors and board members and significant social visibility. David was supposed to give the keynote address. Elena had drafted it for him, as she always did. She knew his speaking style, knew how to shape her words to sound like his voice. She had done this so many times over the years that it had become routine. Her research, her insights, his delivery, but this time she didn't offer. When David mentioned he needed to start preparing his remarks, Elena simply said, "You should probably start drafting, then." He looked surprised. "I thought you usually helped with that." "I'm pretty busy with my consulting work," Elena said. "I'm sure you can handle it." David hesitated, clearly wanting to push back, but also aware that asking his wife to write his speeches wasn't something he could demand. "Right, of course. I'll figure it out." Elena watched him struggle over the next week, producing drafts that were competent but uninspired, lacking the narrative flow and emotional resonance her versions always had. He asked her to review one draft, and she read it quickly and said it was fine. "Just fine?" David pressed. "It's your speech, David. If you're happy with it, that's what matters." He looked frustrated, but didn't argue. Elena felt a small, bitter satisfaction. Let him see what it was like to do his own emotional and intellectual labor. Let him understand what she had been contributing all these years, the value she had been providing that he took for granted. Meanwhile, Elena had been having quiet conversations with the foundation's executive director. She had suggested, carefully and without making it about her marriage, that it might be valuable to have multiple voices at the gala this year. Perhaps she could introduce one of the speakers or present an award. The executive director, who had always appreciated Elena's work behind the scenes, agreed immediately. "I've been thinking we should feature you more prominently anyway. You do so much for us. It's time people knew that." So Elena prepared her own remarks, brief but substantive, positioning herself as more than just David Harrison's wife. She was a scholar in her own right, a professional with expertise and credibility, and she was going to make sure people remembered that. The night before the gala, Elena stood in front of her closet selecting her dress. David was in the shower. She heard her phone buzz on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. She picked it up and read, "Looking forward to tomorrow night. Wear the blue. You know how much I love you in blue." Elena stared at the message. It was clearly meant for Margot, sent to her by mistake. Again, the repetition would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Blue was the color Margot had worn to the last foundation event. Elena had complimented her on it, not knowing that David had requested it. She deleted the text and set down her phone. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. But something inside her made a final, irrevocable decision. She was done being quiet, done absorbing, done protecting a marriage that was already dead, killed by the man who was supposed to cherish it. Tomorrow night at the gala, in front of everyone who mattered, Elena was going to step out of the shadows and into the light. She was going to use her voice, claim her space, and begin the process of reclaiming her life. Not with an explosion, not with public accusations or theatrical confrontation, but with presence, with competence, with the quiet demonstration that she didn't need David to be valuable, that her worth existed independent of his name and resources. And after the gala, when the performance was over and they returned home, she was going to tell him everything. That she knew about the affair, that she had evidence, that she had consulted an attorney, that the marriage as he knew it was over. She didn't know yet if that meant divorce, but it definitely meant the end of her silence. Elena selected a dress for the gala, not blue, red, bold, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. Tomorrow she would be seen. Part 2. Full script. The gala was held at the Historical Society building downtown, a space Elena had selected specifically for its architectural beauty and cultural significance. High ceilings with ornamental molding, chandeliers that caught the light and scattered it like stars, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Elena arrived early to oversee final preparations. She moved through the space with quiet authority, checking table arrangements, confirming audio equipment, speaking with caterers and staff. She wore the red dress she had chosen the night before. It was elegant without being ostentatious, fitted in a way that suggested confidence rather than performance. Several people complimented her immediately, mentioned how beautiful she looked, how good it was to see her. David arrived separately, having been at the office all day. He found her near the registration table and stopped short when he saw her. "You're wearing red," he said. There was something in his voice Elena couldn't quite identify. Surprise, maybe, or displeasure. "I am," she confirmed. "I thought you were wearing the blue dress, the one you wore to the museum benefit last year. I changed my mind." David opened his mouth as if to say more, then closed it. He looked uncomfortable, slightly off balance. Good, Elena thought. Margot arrived 20 minutes later in a dress the color of sapphires, the exact shade David had requested in the text meant for her. She made an entrance the way she always did, commanding attention without trying, moving through the room like someone who had never questioned her right to be at the center of things. She found David quickly, greeted him with a familiarity that made Elena's stomach turn. Then she approached Elena with a bright smile. "Elena, you look incredible. Red is definitely your color." "Thank you," Elena said. "You look lovely as well." Margot leaned in conspiratorially. "I have to steal David for a few minutes before things get started. Quick foundation business. You don't mind, do you?" Elena met her stepsister's eyes. "Of course not. He's all yours." Something flickered across Margot's face. Uncertainty, maybe, at Elena's phrasing. But she recovered quickly, linked her arm through David's, and led him away. Elena watched them disappear into a quiet corridor and felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty. The gala began promptly at 7. Elena stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. She knew most of them, had cultivated these relationships over years of attending events and managing introductions. People were genuinely happy to see her, asked about her new consulting position, mentioned they had heard good things about her work. Martin Chambers, who sat on 3 nonprofit boards and had significant influence in the cultural sector, clasped her hand warmly. "Elena, I was thrilled to hear about your board appointment. Long overdue. You've been operating in David's shadow for too long." Elena smiled. "I appreciate that, Martin. I mean it. You have real expertise, real credibility. I've been saying for years that you should be more visible in this community." They talked for several minutes about her curatorial work, about upcoming exhibitions and funding priorities. Elena felt herself relaxing into the conversation, remembering that she was good at this, that she had value beyond her role as David Harrison's wife. When dinner service began, Elena took her seat at the head table. David sat beside her, Margot several seats away, but within easy sightline. Elena could see them exchanging glances throughout the meal, small smiles and private looks that excluded everyone else at the table. Let them, Elena thought. Let them be careless. Let people see. And people were seeing. Elena noticed other guests watching David and Margot with various expressions. Curiosity, discomfort, knowing looks. The affair might not be public knowledge yet, but it was becoming visible. Cracks were appearing in whatever facade they thought they were maintaining. After dinner, the program began. The executive director gave opening remarks, thanking donors and highlighting the foundation's accomplishments over the past year. Then she introduced Elena. Many of you know Elena Harrison as a dedicated supporter of our work, but what you may not know is that she's an accomplished scholar in her own right, with a doctorate in art history and publications that have shaped institutional understanding of Renaissance patronage networks. It's my great pleasure to invite her to present this year's Excellence in Cultural Leadership Award. Elena rose to scattered applause and walked to the podium. She felt the room's attention settle on her, hundreds of eyes focusing on a woman many of them had overlooked for years. She adjusted the microphone and began to speak. Her remarks were brief, but substantive. She talked about the importance of cultural institutions in shaping public discourse, about the relationship between art and civic life, about the responsibility of leadership to serve rather than dominate. She spoke clearly, without notes, her voice steady and assured. When she presented the award to the recipient, a museum director who had transformed her institution through inclusive programming, the applause was genuine and sustained. Elena returned to her seat feeling something shift in the room's perception of her. She was no longer just David's wife. She was Elena, a professional with her own credibility and voice. David's keynote address followed. He delivered the speech he had written himself, and while it was competent, it lacked the emotional resonance and narrative cohesion Elena's versions always provided. He got through it without major errors, and the audience applauded politely. But it was clear to anyone paying attention that something was off. After the formal program ended, the gala transitioned into reception mode. People mingled, networking and socializing. Elena found herself surrounded by colleagues and contacts who wanted to talk with her, to discuss potential collaborations, to express interest in her consulting work. Sarah Chen, who directed a contemporary art museum across town, pulled Elena aside. "I've been meaning to reach out to you. We have a curatorial project starting in the spring that would be perfect for your expertise. Italian Renaissance influences on modern artists. It's a major exhibition, and I'd love to have you consult." "I'd be very interested," Elena said. "Wonderful. I'll send you the details next week. And Elena?" Sarah touched her arm lightly. "It's good to see you stepping into your own light. You've been too generous with your brilliance for too long." Elena felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. "Thank you." Across the room, David was talking with a group of major donors. Margot hovered nearby, laughing at something someone said, her hand resting briefly on David's arm. The gesture was small but proprietary, marking territory. Elena observed them with detachment. They looked like a couple. Anyone watching would see it. The body language, the familiarity, the way they oriented toward each other even in a crowded room. The gala ended around 11. Guests trickled out, thanking Elena and the executive director, promising future support. David was engaged in a lengthy conversation with a potential donor and didn't notice when Elena collected her coat and bag. She found him eventually, told him she was taking a car home. He looked surprised. "I thought we'd leave together." "You're still working the room," Elena said. "I'm tired. I'll see you at home." She left before he could respond. In the car, she leaned her head against the window and watched the city lights blur past. She had done it. She had stepped out of the shadows, used her voice, claimed visibility, and it had felt right, natural, like remembering who she used to be before she learned to make herself small. When she got home, she changed out of her red dress and into comfortable clothes. She made tea and sat in the living room, waiting. She knew what was coming next, the conversation she had been avoiding for weeks, and she was ready. David arrived home after midnight. He came into the living room and found her sitting in semi-darkness, a single lamp illuminating the space. "Why did you leave early?" he asked. There was an edge to his voice. "People were asking about you. I told you. I was tired." "You didn't seem tired. You seemed like you were avoiding me." Elena looked at him. This man she had loved, married, built a life with. This stranger who had betrayed her and was now upset that she had left a party early. "Sit down, David." Something in her tone made him obey. He sat on the opposite sofa, watching her warily. "We need to talk," Elena said. "About what?" "About the affair you're having with Margot." The words landed in the room like stones. David's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, denial, calculation. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Elena, I don't know what you think is happening, but don't." Her voice was sharp. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore." "I'm not. I know about the text you sent me, the one meant for her. About last night, about the usual place, about how she's everything I'm not. I know about the dinner receipt I found in your jacket from the night you told me you were working late. I know about the foundation meetings that aren't really meetings, the late nights that aren't really work. I know about the text you sent her yesterday telling her to wear blue, the text you accidentally sent to me instead." David's face had gone pale. "Elena, I've known for weeks. I've been watching you lie to me, watching Margot pretend to care about me while sleeping with my husband, watching you both grow careless because you were so confident I would stay silent." Elena's voice was steady, cold, and I did stay silent. Not because I was uncertain or weak, but because I needed time to understand what I was feeling and what I wanted. "It's not what you think," David said, his voice desperate. "It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. It wasn't a moment. It was months, maybe longer. Don't insult me by minimizing it now." David stood up, ran his hands through his hair. "Okay, yes, okay. Something happened with Margot, but it didn't mean anything. She pursued me and I was flattered and it got out of hand. Stop blaming her. You made choices. You sent the texts. You scheduled the dinners. You lied to my face every single day while telling her she was everything I wasn't. I didn't mean that." "Yes, you did." Elena stood now too, facing him across the room. "You meant it when you said it. And it's probably true. She's louder than me, more demanding, more comfortable taking up space. She's everything I'm not because I made myself. Quiet and accommodating and endlessly flexible. I taught you that my needs were negotiable and my feelings were manageable. I made myself so easy that you took me for granted. That's not fair. What's not fair, Elena said, her voice rising for the first time, is that you broke our marriage vows with my stepsister. Someone who knows me, who grew up with me, who was supposed to be family. That's not a random affair, David. That's a specific cruelty. David's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. God, Elena, I'm so sorry. It was stupid and selfish and I hate myself for it. But we can fix this. I'll end things with Margot. I'll do whatever you need. We can go to counseling. I'll be transparent about everything. I'll prove to you that you can trust me again. Why? Elena asked quietly. The question seemed to confuse him. What? Why do you want to save the marriage now? You didn't want to preserve it when you were sleeping with Margot. You didn't value it enough to stay faithful. So why do you suddenly care now that I know? Because the first love you don't love me, David. You love the version of me that made your life comfortable, the version that managed your calendar and wrote your speeches and never complained. You love having a wife who was always available, always accommodating, always willing to disappear so you could shine. That's not true. When was the last time you asked about my research, my work, my interior life? When was the last time you were curious about what I think or feel about anything that doesn't directly affect you? David stared at her, unable to answer. You can't remember, Elena said, because you stopped seeing me years ago. I became furniture in your life. Valuable furniture, maybe. Well-chosen and functional, but inanimate. You stopped treating me like a person with thoughts and needs and a voice that mattered. I never meant to make you feel that way. I know you didn't mean to. That's the problem. You didn't think about it at all. My invisibility was so convenient for you that you never questioned it. And when Margot came along, loud and demanding and visible, you were drawn to her because she took up space in a way I had forgotten how to do. David crossed the room, reached for her hands. She let him take them, but didn't return the pressure. Please, he said, and his voice broke. Please don't give up on us. I know I destroyed your trust. I know I hurt you in ways I can't fully understand. But I love you, and I want to fix this. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to make this right. Elena looked down at their joined hands. She thought about the years of marriage, the life they had built, the version of herself she had been when she believed this was love. I don't know if you can make it right, she said. I don't know if I want you to try. Don't say that. I need space, David. Time to think without you managing my emotions or trying to fix things before I've even processed what happened. How much time? I don't know. Weeks, maybe months. Where do you want me to go? Elena pulled her hands from his. I'm not leaving this house. It's half mine. You can stay in the guest suite or you can find somewhere else, but I'm not the one who needs to relocate. David nodded slowly. Okay, the guest suite. I'll give you space, but Elena, please know that I'm going to do everything I can to earn your forgiveness. I'm going to prove that I can be the husband you deserve. Elena looked at him. The tears on his face were real. The desperation was genuine. But underneath it all, she could see the calculation. He was already strategizing, already planning his rehabilitation campaign. This wasn't about her pain. It was about his loss. David, she said quietly, I don't need you to prove anything. I need you to understand that the version of our marriage you want to save is the version where I had no voice. And I'm never going back to that. Whether we stay married or not, that Elena is gone. She left him standing in the living room and went upstairs to their bedroom. She locked the door behind her, climbed into bed, and finally allowed herself to cry. Not for the marriage she was losing, but for the years she had spent silencing herself, for the woman she had been who believed that love required her to disappear. The next morning, Elena woke early and called Margot. We need to talk, she said, when her stepsister answered. In person. Today. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Elena, Noon, the cafe on Maple Street. Don't make me ask twice. She hung up before Margot could respond. The cafe was quiet when Elena arrived, a small neighborhood place with good coffee and few customers on a Saturday afternoon. She chose a table near the window and ordered tea she didn't drink. Margot arrived 15 minutes late. She looked beautiful and anxious, her usual confidence dimmed. She slid into the seat across from Elena without her characteristic enthusiasm. David called me, Margot said immediately. He told me, I've known for weeks, Elena said. I just decided to stop pretending I didn't. Margot looked down at her hands. I'm so sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. That's not fair. What's not fair is that you slept with my husband. Elena's voice was quiet but sharp as glass. What's not fair is that you came to my home, ate at my table, accepted my help, and connections, all while betraying me in the most intimate way possible. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Margot? Explain it to me. Margot's eyes filled with tears. It just happened. We were working together on foundation projects, and we connected, and I didn't mean for it to become what it became. You connected, Elena repeated flatly. How convenient. And it never occurred to you that connecting with your stepsister's husband might be a betrayal. You don't understand. Then help me understand, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you saw something you wanted, and took it. The way you've been taking things from me our entire lives. Margot's expression shifted, hurt giving way to defensiveness. That's not fair. You've always had everything. I've had everything. Elena's voice rose slightly. You've had every advantage, your mother's money, your confidence, your ability to demand attention without apology. I've spent my entire life making myself smaller so you could take up more space. That's not my fault, Margot said. I didn't ask you to diminish yourself. You're right, you didn't ask. You just benefited from it, over and over. And when that wasn't enough, you decided to take my husband too. He came to me, Margot said, and there was an edge to her voice now. He was unhappy. He felt invisible in his own marriage. You were so wrapped up in being the perfect wife that you forgot to actually connect with him. Elena laughed, a sound without humor. Is that what he told you? That I was the problem? That I didn't connect with him? He said you were distant, cold, that you stopped being interested in him. I wrote his speeches, Margot. I managed his entire life. I made everything in his world run smoothly while setting aside my own career, my own needs, my own voice. And he repaid me by convincing you that I was the cold one, the distant one, the problem in our marriage. Margot looked uncertain now. He loves me. He loves that you make him feel important. He loves that you demand his attention in a way I stopped doing. But that's not love, Margot. That's ego, gratification. And the moment you become less exciting or more demanding or start requiring actual, emotional labor, he'll do to you exactly what he did to me. You don't know that. I know that he's a man who lies to his wife's face and sleeps with her stepsister. I know that he broke vows he made in front of everyone we love. I know that when I confronted him last night, his first instinct was to blame you, to say you pursued him, that he was weak, that it didn't mean anything. Margot's face went pale. He said that? Of course he did. Because David doesn't take responsibility. He manages perceptions. And right now, his perception management strategy is to minimize his agency and maximize yours. They sat in silence for a long moment. Margot looked like she was processing something uncomfortable, some crack in the narrative she had been telling herself. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said finally, quietly. Yes, you did, Elena said. Maybe not consciously, but you made a choice every single time you texted him. Every time. You met him secretly. Every time you came to my home and pretended everything was normal. You chose your desire over my dignity. That was intentional. What do you want from me? Margot asked. An apology? Punishment? What? Elena looked at her stepsister and felt a strange clarity. I don't want anything from you, Margot. I want you to understand that our relationship is over. Not paused, not damaged, over. You're not my family anymore. You're not my friend. You're someone who proved she has no integrity, no loyalty, no basic human decency. Elena, I'm not asking you to grovel or beg. I'm informing you of a boundary. You and I are done. I won't attend events where you're present. I won't make small talk with you. At family gatherings, I won't help you with your career or your life or anything else you might need. You're dead to me, Margot. Socially, emotionally, completely. Margot's tears spilled over. That's so harsh. What's harsh is what you did to me, Elena said. I'm just responding proportionally. You chose to destroy our relationship. I'm choosing to honor that destruction by making it permanent. What about David? Margot asked, and there was something almost desperate in her voice. Are you divorcing him? Elena stood, collecting her coat and bag. That's none of your business. But if you're asking because you think he's now available for you, I'd encourage you to reconsider. David doesn't want you, Margot. He wants novelty, and you're about to become very familiar." She left her stepsister sitting alone at the table and walked out into the afternoon sunlight. Her hands were shaking, her heart racing, but underneath the adrenaline was something else. Relief. She had used her voice. She had set a boundary. She had refused to absorb cruelty without naming it, and it felt like the first full breath she had taken in weeks. "You know, I need to pause here for a moment and talk to you directly. Not about Elena or David or Margot, but about what we just witnessed in this story. Because what Elena experienced isn't just a plot point in a romance drama. It's a pattern that plays out in real life, in real relationships every single day. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever silenced yourself to keep the peace, if you've ever made yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger, I want you to hear this. Your voice is not a privilege that others grant you. It's your birthright. And the people who truly love you, who truly value you, will never require you to silence yourself to earn their affection. Real love doesn't ask you to diminish. Real partnership doesn't demand your disappearance. Elena spent years believing that being quiet meant being strong, that accommodation was the same as love, that her needs were somehow less important than everyone else's comfort. And in doing so, she taught the people around her that she could be overlooked, taken for granted, betrayed without consequence. But here's the truth that took Elena weeks of pain to understand. Silence is only powerful when it's chosen. When silence becomes self-erasure, when it enables others to treat you as disposable or invisible, it's not peace. It's slow disappearance. Some of you watching this right now are living in your own version of Elena's silence. Maybe it's not an affair. Maybe it's a job where your contributions go uncredited. Maybe it's a friendship where you always give and never receive. Maybe it's a family dynamic where your feelings are always negotiable while everyone else's are sacred. And I want you to know that you are not responsible for managing the comfort of people who disrespect you. You're not obligated to stay quiet about your pain to protect those who caused it. And your decision to finally speak, to set boundaries, to choose yourself, that's not cruelty. That's courage. The same strength that allowed you to endure is the strength that will carry you forward. The same patience that helped you survive is the same patience that will help you rebuild. You already have everything you need. You just need permission to use it. So today, I'm praying for you. I'm praying that you find the courage to use your voice, even when it shakes. I'm praying that you surround yourself with people who celebrate your fullness, not your silence. I'm praying for clarity, the kind that helps you see the difference between people who value you and people who use you. I'm praying that you never again mistake your quietness for weakness, because strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply stop participating in your own diminishment. And I'm praying that you choose yourself again and again until choosing yourself becomes as natural as breathing. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to take up space. May you walk in that truth today and every day forward. May you find the people who love your voice as much as your silence. And may you never again trade your dignity for someone else's comfort. Now, let's see how Elena's story ends. 3 months had passed since the gala. 3 months since the confrontation, since the boundaries set, since the life Elena knew fractured and reformed into something new. She hadn't divorced David yet. The separation was formal but not final, a liminal space that gave her room to breathe and think and discover who she was outside the role of wife. David had moved into a corporate apartment downtown after 2 weeks in the guest suite proved untenable. Living in the same house with the chasm between them had been too painful for both of them. He called often, texted regularly, sent flowers and letters and apologies. He had started therapy, he told her. He was doing the work. He understood what he had destroyed. He wanted to prove he could be different, better, worthy of her trust. Elena listened to these messages with a detachment that would have been impossible 3 months ago. She responded occasionally, briefly, maintaining civility without offering hope. She wasn't punishing him. She simply had no energy to manage his rehabilitation campaign. She was too busy rebuilding herself. The consulting position had expanded into something more substantial. Elena now worked 3 days a week at the museum, leading curatorial projects and mentoring younger scholars. She had an office with her name on the door, colleagues who valued her expertise, work that challenged and fulfilled her. She had also accepted the board position that had been offered months ago, the one that had surprised David so much. She attended monthly meetings where her voice carried weight, where her insights shaped institutional direction, where she was visible and valued. Her social life had shifted too. She saw friends more regularly, women who had their own careers and complicated lives and understood what it meant to reclaim yourself after years of accommodation. She had coffee with Rachel, the lawyer who had almost divorced 3 years ago, and they talked about boundaries and self-advocacy and the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Elena had also started writing again. The research that had been languishing in her drafts for years was now becoming a book, a scholarly work on Renaissance patronage networks and the invisible labor of women in artistic production. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was writing about historical erasure while emerging from her own. She still lived in the house she had shared with David, but she had reclaimed it as her own space. She redecorated her study, bought furniture she loved without consulting anyone, created an environment that reflected her taste rather than compromise, and she had maintained the boundary with Margot. Complete. Total. Her stepsister had tried to reach out several times in the early weeks, texts and emails that Elena deleted without reading. Her father had called, distressed about the rift in the family, asking if there was any way to heal it. Elena had been gentle but firm. What Margot did isn't something I can forgive or forget. I'm not asking you to choose between us, but I am telling you that I won't be at events where she's present. That's my boundary, and I need you to respect it. Her father had accepted this sadly, and Elena knew it cost him. But she also knew that her dignity was more valuable than his comfort. She loved him, but she wouldn't sacrifice her well-being to make family gatherings less awkward. It was a Friday evening in early winter when Elena attended the opening reception for an exhibition she had curated. The gallery was full of colleagues, donors, art enthusiasts. Elena moved through the crowd with confidence, discussing the works on display, answering questions, accepting congratulations. Sarah Chen, the museum director who had commissioned the exhibition, found her near a painting of the Madonna. This is extraordinary work, Elena. The catalog essay alone is worth the price of admission. You've reframed how we understand these patronage relationships completely. Elena smiled. Thank you. It's been a labor of love. I have 3 other institutions asking if you're available for consulting projects. You're building quite a reputation. I'm grateful for the opportunities. Sarah touched her arm lightly. You seem different, lighter somehow. I don't know if that makes sense, but you seem more yourself than I've ever seen you. Elena felt unexpected emotion rise in her throat. I think I am more myself. I'm remembering who I was before I started disappearing. They talked for a few more minutes before Sarah was pulled away by other guests. Elena stood alone in the gallery, looking at the paintings she had selected and contextualized and arranged. This was her work, her vision, her voice made visible. Elena. She turned to find David standing a few feet away. He looked thinner than she remembered, tired around the eyes. He wore a suit she recognized, one she had helped him select years ago. What are you doing here? She asked quietly. Sarah invited me. She didn't know it would be awkward. I can leave if you want. Elena considered this. 3 months ago, his presence would have destabilized her completely. Now she felt only a mild discomfort, easily managed. It's fine. You can stay. David moved closer, looking at the painting she had been studying. This is incredible, Elena. The exhibition, your catalog essay. Sarah was telling me earlier that this is going to tour to other museums. You should be so proud. I am, she said simply. I'm proud of you too, David said. I know I don't have the right to say that anymore, but I am. Watching you step into your own light, seeing you get the recognition you deserve. It's been the only good thing in these terrible months. Elena looked at him. Why are you here, David? Really? I wanted to see you, to see how you're doing. You haven't been returning my calls. I've been busy. I know, I can see that. You're thriving. He said this without bitterness, just observation. I guess I wanted to see if there's any hope. Any chance that we might be able to rebuild what I destroyed. Elena was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. I don't know, she said finally. I honestly don't know if our marriage is salvageable. I don't know if I want to salvage it. That's fair, David said. That's more than fair. But is there any chance, even a small one? Elena looked at him, this man she had loved, and felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Not the sharp pain of betrayal anymore, but a kind of sad recognition of what had been lost. If there is any chance, she said slowly, it would require you to love a version of me you've never known. The version that has a voice, that sets boundaries, that won't disappear to make you comfortable, that won't write your speeches or manage your emotions or make myself smaller so you can feel bigger. I want to love that version of you, David said. I'm learning to love her now, watching from a distance. Wanting to and being able to are different things, Elena said. Our entire marriage was built on a dynamic where I had no voice. I don't know if you can be in a relationship with an equal partner, David. I don't know if your love for me can survive my refusal to be invisible. David's eyes filled with tears. Can I try? Can you give me the chance to prove I can be different? Elena looked around the gallery, at the evidence of her work and expertise, at the colleagues who valued her, at the life she was building that didn't revolve around being someone's wife. I'm not ready to answer that question, she said. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of us. I'm still healing from what you did. And I'm not willing to rush that process to relieve your guilt or uncertainty. How long do you need? I don't know. Maybe months, maybe years, maybe forever. David nodded slowly. Can I ask one thing? What? Don't close the door completely, please. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I destroyed your trust in ways that might be irreparable. But if there's any possibility, however small, that you might be willing to try rebuilding, I want you to know I'll wait. However long it takes. Elena felt something soften in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of something that could eventually become forgiveness. I'm not closing the door, she said. But I'm not opening it either. I'm just leaving it exactly where it is while I figure out what I want. That's all I can ask for, David said. He reached out as if to touch her hand, then thought better of it and let his arm drop. Thank you for even that much. He left shortly after, and Elena returned to the reception. She talked with donors and colleagues, accepted compliments on her curatorial work, made plans for future collaborations. And she felt for the first time in months something close to peace. She didn't know if she would eventually forgive David. She didn't know if their marriage could be rebuilt on a foundation of equality and mutual respect. But she knew that she was whole without him, that her value existed independent of his validation, that she could build a full, meaningful life whether he was in it or not. And that knowledge, that certainty, was its own kind of freedom. A week later, Elena sat in her home study working on revisions to her book manuscript. Classical music played softly in the background. Tea steamed in a cup at her elbow. The house was quiet but not lonely. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Coffee tomorrow? I want to hear about the exhibition opening. Elena smiled and confirmed. She had plans tomorrow afternoon as well, lunch with Sarah to discuss another curatorial project. Her calendar was filling with professional commitments and social connections that had nothing to do with being David Harrison's wife. She looked at her reflection in the window, seeing herself clearly in the gathering darkness. She had changed in these 3 months, not dramatically, but fundamentally. She stood differently, now spoke differently, moved through the world with a quiet confidence that didn't require external validation. The woman who had made herself small, who had silenced her voice to keep the peace, who had believed that love required her to disappear, that woman was gone, not destroyed, but transformed, evolved into someone who understood that real strength wasn't about endurance without complaint, but about boundaries maintained with clarity. Elena didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she would divorce David or attempt reconciliation. She didn't know where her career would lead or what her life would look like in 5 years. But she knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, she would face it as herself. Fully, finally, free. She returned her attention to her manuscript, to the work of excavating the invisible labor of Renaissance women, of making visible what history had erased. And in doing so, she was writing her own story too. A story of reclamation, of voice found and boundaries set, of a woman who learned that silence is only powerful when it's chosen. Her voice mattered. Her work mattered. She mattered, and she would never forget that again. Listen, before you go, I want to say thank you. Thank you for staying with Elena's story, for witnessing her journey from silence to voice, from erasure to sovereignty. Stories like this matter because they remind us that transformation is possible, that finding your voice is never too late, that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. If Elena's story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in her struggle or her strength, I want to invite you to subscribe to the Billionaire Romance family. This isn't just a channel. It's a community of people who believe in stories about dignity, about transformation, about the courage it takes to choose yourself when everyone else expects you to disappear. Every story we share here is about recognizing your worth, finding your voice, and refusing to settle for love that requires you to be less than you are. These are stories about real emotions, real struggles, real triumphs. And they're for anyone who's ever felt invisible, who's ever silenced themselves, who's ever wondered if they deserve better. Subscribe, and let's continue this journey together. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And we're here to remind you of that, one story at a time. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join a family that believes you deserve to be seen, heard, and valued exactly as you are. Until next time, remember that you are not too much, and you are not too little. You are exactly enough. And your voice, when you choose to use it, has the power to change everything.